As some of you may know, at the weekends in summer, I like to dress up in this outfit and join up with some friends and go and do some Napoleonic reenactment. And this is a hobby I've been doing for a number of years now and have loads of fun doing it. And it got us to thinking, as the new Astra Militarum Codex appeared, could we use this as inspiration to create our own regiment? So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do, creating a regiment inspired by the French army of the Napoleonic Wars. And in fact, we've picked out a particular regiment, one of the most famous regiments in history really for this, which is the 1st Old Guard Grenadiers. And so what we're going to be doing here is a little bit of green stuffing with some simple sculpting to create things like their bear skins. We're going to be doing a little bit of chopping and changing on the miniature too. And it's going to be really fun, and hopefully it'll inspire you to have a go at creating a regiment of your own. Now, without further ado, let's get to the desk and vive l'empereur. So for this conversion, the first thing that I've needed to do is decide what model is going to form the basis of it, and what I've picked out is the Deathcore Krieg plastics. So the veteran guardsmen that you can get now for kill team, so that's this set right here. Because they're wearing great coats, they're actually really similar to the ones that the Old Guard had at the Battle of Waterloo, so that's the sort of appearance I want to go for here. Now what I've done so far is build the core of the conversion, and he is right here. So you can see I've got the full body, I've also put on his backpack as well. And we go up to the arms, and the arm is where we're going to start converting, because we thought it'd be really cool, rather than having the little rifle that the Krieg have, to change it to look more like a musket. So what we've done is go through the bits box and we've dug out some old Skitari. So I've got a frame right here, and specifically what I'm looking at is the galvanic rifles. So ones like this one just here. Now you get loads of this in this kit, and you can see a lot of them have the arms on, which doesn't really matter for our purposes because we're going to cut into them a little bit. But if you've ever collected Skitari, then you'll know you actually get loads of weapons like this spare, because depending on how you build the kit, you'll just have loads of arms left over. So if you're looking for some of these rifles, find someone who collects Skitari, they're bound to have loads of spares. But anyway, what we want to do is merge the two together. So the plan is first of all to start out with the las rifle and then start adding the galvanic rifle onto it. So the rifle I've picked out is part 44. That's this one right here for the pose we're going to go for. And so what we need to do is start by clipping this out. So all we've got to do is just snip around it. So just there and around here and right here as well. So there we go. And then what we need to do is get the rifle as well. So for the galvanic rifle, what I'm going to do is use the one that doesn't have any hands on it, but it wouldn't really matter which one I go for. So it's this one I want to go for. So once again, all we've got to do is snip this out. So start right there. Then on the underside, right there, just here, and then the back of the stock as well. So what we now need to do is work out how these two are going to go together, and the plan is to start out with the las gun. Now if we take a close look at it, you can see what we've got is a grip underneath it just there. So the plan is to cut the barrel directly in front of it, so just around about there. And then these almost coils we've got across the top, I want to cut them out as well, so that what we'll have is a sort of L shape at the front just there. Then meanwhile for the rifle, what I want to do is mirror that, and I'm planning to start it just around about there. So I want to cut it across there, then start cutting into that part until the two fit. Now it's going to be a bit of back and forth to work out exactly where the cut's going to be, but if I start out with the rifle, then I'll know what I need to do with the galvanic rifle. So I'm going to begin with this las rifle. And here we go, I've got the two parts, and I've been just gently cutting and testing to make sure they fit together, and I'm happy with that. So now what we need to do is just glue these two parts together, and then it's time to stick on the arms. And here we are with the two bits of the gun glued together and the arms stuck on. We've now got our soldier armed with his sci-fi laser musket. And so now what we can do is move on to the next thing, which is going to be to glue on the head. And what we need to do first of all is choose a head. And throughout Games Workshop range, there's loads and loads of human heads that you could pick from. But ideally what you want are ones with moustaches, because this is part of the Old Guard style. But what I've got actually is one that I think is perfect, because not only that, it's also got an earring as well, which is again part of the Old Guard kit. And that is this head right here. And this is from the old Empire State Troops kit, in these days called the Free Guild kits. And well, you can see it's perfect. We've got a great moustache on there, we've got a scar so it looks like a veteran, and there's an earring there too. So this is the one I'm going to use. However, the fit for this one is quite different from the Krieg soldier. So if you take a look, what we've got is a bit of a block just there, and the gas mask would normally fit onto the front of that. This needs to fit into a socket. So what I've got to do is just make a bit of space for that to fit in. I think I have to cut a little bit on both sides, but what I'm going to do is drill a hole in there and then use that as guidance to start carving some of that out. Then I'll adjust the back of the head, and then we can glue them both together. I've finished hollowing out that collar, and so you can see with the head too, I've just trimmed it ever so slightly at the back, and now they fit together nicely. So what I'm going to do is stick these two together, and then we can move on to starting to assemble the bear skin on top. Now that we've got that head glued in, what we can do is move on to the iconic bear skin. And for this, what we need to do first of all is actually build some structure inside it, because green stuff is great at holding detail, but it's not particularly robust. And if you want to see what I mean, try green stuffing a sword blade, and well, you'll see straight away it's very rubbery and it's not going to survive for very long. So what we need to do is do some sort of internal structure to allow that green stuff to be secure. And at the same time, what we can do is use this to form the basis of a particular pattern that appears on the top and back of these bear skins. What it means is basically gluing a column of plastic on top of his head, and to make sure it's nice and stable, the first thing we've got to do is just get a little flat area on top of the head. So that's where we're going to start. So to do it, all I'm going to do is just file a little flat area directly on the top just here. I've finished filing down the top of the head, so you can see we've got that flat part just on top there where we can build a structure, and I've also just taken the time just to trim down his hair a little bit around the top as well, so that way we've got a bit more room when we can move on to using the green stuff. But now what we need to do is create that structure, and to do this what you could use is just a column or a tube of some plastic card, but actually what I'm going to use is some bits on the plastic sprue, because if you take a look, what we've got is these little almost rod-like pieces just here, and what we're going to do is just chop some of them out so they're quite tall, but what we want to do is get hold of two of these and then glue them together. I've got those two pieces stuck together now and just made sure they're nice and smooth, and the idea then is that these are going to stick on top of his head right there and form the main structure. Now at the moment they're a little bit too tall, and actually they're sort of the wrong shape, because if you take a look at images of these bear skins, they're not flat on top, there's almost like a wedge to them, so what we need to do is cut that. Now from eyeballing the size of these in the artwork compared to our miniature, we know that what we need to do is cut it around about halfway through the top little cylinder right there, and also it has to be at that angle. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got my knife, and if you're going to be doing this with a knife, of course, be very, very careful. If you're a youngster, you'll definitely want an adult to do this part for you. But what we need to do is just cut it, making sure that we're at about that angle right there, and then we just got to slice through. And here we have that model with the structure glued to his head, and it looks super weird at this moment, but bear with me, it is going to make sense in a bit. What I have done is just made sure that's nice and smooth around there, just sanding that edge so it's got a nice curve going around there. And well, with that done, what we can now do is start moving on to the green stuff. But just before we put it on, I've prepared two pieces which we're going to put into it. You can see them right here. I first of all got a little winged skull design, and this is going to form the plate that goes directly above his forehead. So these are little trinkets that appear in all kinds of Imperial kits. You just need some little bits and pieces like that. That's where I got one of those. I've also got here the wax part of a purity seal, and this is going to go in place of the rosette on the side of the bearskin, so we're going to use that later on as well. But what we need to do now is get the green stuff ready, and I've got a little piece that I've cut off just here. Now with this sort of thing, what you need to do first of all is remove the part where the two colours are touching, because that little line there has already cured, and this will show up when you mix it together. So you just need to cut that out, then get together some yellow and blue, just make sure they're slightly more yellow than blue, and then mash them together until they turn green. And here we have the ball of green stuff, and what we need to do with this first of all is just flatten it and just lengthen it out a little bit. So we're looking for a shape sort of kind of like that will do just fine. And the idea of this now is that we need to wrap it around that structure that we've got. And the exact amount of green stuff will vary a little bit depending on, well, how tall the actual main structure is, and we'll find out as we get it on there. But for this first stage, what we want to do is have plenty so we can get it on and then start adjusting it. And so what we need to do is put it on like that, and then start pressing it round, going round the back to just get it on there. Now obviously there's a bit too much at this stage, but that's okay, because now what we're going to do is start patting it down and getting it into position. To do this, what you'll need is a sculpting tool, and I've got one right here, and to actually use this and prevent any of the green stuff from sticking to the tool, a great thing to get hold of is some of this E45 cream. And all you do with this is just get a little bit of it and, well, put it on the end of the sculpting tool. So all you got to do is just get a small amount. So there we go, got some just there. Just put it onto the end of the tool, just make sure to wipe it around there like that so it's been coated with it, and then we'll be absolutely fine as we start to manipulate the green stuff on the miniature. And so for the first step, all we've got to do is get it in position, and then we can start removing the excess. So what I want to do is just make sure I start patting it down and getting it into the right place. So we're looking at around there on his forehead, pushing it around the back, so going to here. Then as we get around to this part where there's definitely too much, at this stage what we want to do is just start pinching it and removing the excess. So all the way along there like that to get rid of the extra that we've got on the back, and then just carry on pressing it down until it's smoothly all the way around. And here we go, that green stuff's been applied, and you can see I did remove quite a bit in the end and smooth it right down, and I really got rid of quite a lot on the top as well, because remember that structure? We want that circle showing through at the very top there, because later on that's going to get painted red. We just want to go around the outside of it to make sure it's fully enclosed. I can see too, we've got our purity seal buried into the side of it just there to be our rosette, and we've also got that little eagle design there, that little wing skull just at the very top to be the plate at the top of the forehead right there. And so with that done, what we now need to do is start making the texture in the green stuff to be the fur. And there's loads of ways of doing fur and hair and things like that, but in this one what we're going to do is quite an exaggerated version of it to really stand out. There's lots of texture there, so it'll be fun to paint it. To do it, what you'll need is your sculpting tool once again, and this time we want to be using the sharp side of it. Again, I've just made sure I put some E45 cream on there so nothing's going to stick to it, and really all you got to do is just start digging into the green stuff to create that texture. So I tend to go this way around and just pick a starting point, just start going in like that, just flicking it around, just moving it, and just keep going away at it like this until you're happy with the result. Now, if you ever find that you're not entirely happy with how it's looking, remember you can always smooth it out and start again, but it's just a matter of just keep on working at it until you're happy, and once you are, just leave it overnight to cure. And here we have the converted soldier all fully built, and it's been overnight, so the green stuff is completely cured, and you can see I also just put a little bit in his neck just there to fill a little gap that was directly beneath the head just there. And as a final finishing touch, I also went through my bits box to find a feather which just stuck on the side of the bear skin there, and so with that he's now all complete and fully built. So we're ready to start painting, and what I'm going to do is paint him very much like how I paint my own Napoleonic troops, so this means we need to start out with a grey undercoat. So I'm going to spray him with some Mechanicus standard grey, then we can get painting. The undercoat's dry, and you can see it really does make everything tie together nicely, and now it has in fact inspired the name of this regiment, because in the various reenactment groups that I know of, in the 21st on the French side, there are a lot of guys who play Warhammer 40k, so this is for you guys. What we're going to do is call it the 21st Napoleon Grenadiers. So what we're going to do is get to painting it. Now what we want to do is start out with a whole host of base coats that can all share the same colour wash, because this is a really nice and efficient way of painting models like this, and it makes sense then to start out with the main colour that's going to be sharing this wash. That is of course going to be the blue greatcoat, and for this what I'm going to use is the same blue I actually use on my Napoleonic French army. What I've got is some Kantor blue, and to apply it I'm going to go for a large base coating brush. So I've got a monster brush here from the Army Painter, ideal for this sort of thing. All we want to do at this stage is make sure all that coat is base coated with this colour. So as ever, just make sure it's nicely thinned down with a little touch of water, and then all we've got to do is just start painting it in. So we'll look at areas like this. It's just a matter of making sure it gets a good even coat and is worked into all the nooks and crannies as well. I've finished base coating the grey coat now, so it's time to move on to base coating a few more colours on there, and we'll start out with the colour for the trousers, and here we want an off-white, so I'm going to use some Griffin Claw for this. Then what we need to do is base coat the leather of the backpack, and for this I'll use some Mournfang Brown, and then finally we've got various red details to base coat, and here I'm going to use some Sanguine Scarlet. But first of all what we need is that Griffin Claw, and for it I'm going for a size 1 brush now from Artisopus, so sort of a medium-sized brush for a bit more control, because here now just got to be careful of that blue coat as we block this in, and what we're looking for is the trousers. So we're going down here now. It's just a matter of making sure this is neatly base coated with 2 thin coats, just to make sure as we go along that we don't catch that blue. Now the trousers are base coated. The next thing to do is to base coat the leather parts of the backpack just here, and for this I'm going to use some Mournfang Brown. And whilst I'm doing this, I'm just going to be careful of the bedroll that goes across the top there, because I want to keep that grey. There we are, the pack's been base coated, and I decided to use the same colour for that little sort of box that we got on the front of his body right there. With that done, we're now moving on to Sanguine Scarlet, and this is first of all going to be for that patch that we've got on top of the bear skin, so we're looking at this bit just here. In addition, I'm going to paint the feather that's on the side of it too. And there we are, the red's blocked in, and so now we can move on to another 3 base coat colours, and for this what we're going to do first of all is take a look at a dark brown. So I'm going to use some cuirass leather here, and this is going to be for the wood of his rifle, but also his hair as well, so like his moustache and things like that. Once that's done, we'll then move on to base coating all the white belts, and for this I'm going to use a light grey to get things going, so I'm going to use some Carcharodon grey here, and then finally what we need to do is to base coat all the black details with an off black that we can wash down. So for this I'm going to use some Death Reaper. But first of all what we need is some of that cuirass leather, and again I'm going to go for my size 1 brush, and for this first of all I'm just going to base coat all of his rifles so that we can later on pick out the metallic bits on it. So we're looking at things like the stock down here. We just want to block it all in at this stage, and same just around here too. Now as I mentioned, I'm also going to be keeping an eye out for his hair, so in this case we've got his moustache just in here, and also I'm just going to paint the rest of his hair around the side and back of his head as well. Next up, we want to base coat all the belts, and here what we want to do is simulate all the white cross belts that are so well known during the Napoleonic period, and for this what we need is a light grey. So I'm using some Cacao grey applied with a 00 brush for lots more control, and here I'm looking for any belt and just picking it out with this colour. And then finally we can move on to an off black, and here I'm using some Death Reaper, and this is going to be for all the black details such as the bearskin. And with that, we've now finished base coating with the regular acrylic paints for all this before we use the wash, but what we need to do is add in the metallics before we do that wash. That's what we're going to do now. And here what we'll need is a silver and a brass. So for the silver, I'm going to use some Surcoat silver, and for the brass, I'm going to use some Spartan bronze. And we'll start out with the silver, and for this I've switched to a size 0 brush, so a little bit smaller than my other base coating brush, just for a little bit more control. And with this, what I'm going to be doing is just looking for a few features to pick out with this colour, which first of all is going to be on the las rifle, because I want to push that suggestion of a musket a little bit further, which means what I'm going to do is this top part that goes across just that part there, I'm going to paint this silver as if it's the barrel of the gun. So we're looking at going all the way along here and all the way down to the base of it here. And then we're just looking for a few mechanical details that we want to pick out too, so things such as the magazine, for example, right down here. Now in addition, this miniature does have some armour on him, so you can see on the shoulder plates here, and normal Napoleonic infantry wouldn't necessarily have armour like this, but some of the heavy cavalry did, so we're going to be emphasising that appearance with this by doing the same sort of colours as what they had. So the flat plates we want to be silver, then that trim we're going to pick out with some brass. And with that done, we can then move on to base coating all the brass details, and for this I'm using some Spartan bronze. And these are scattered all across the miniature, the things like the little plate that we put in just here. But as a quick note, there are buttons on here which we're going to be picking out with this sort of colour, but at this stage it's not worth base coating them because they're so small. I'm talking about little buttons like there on the front of his coat. Instead we'll just pick them out later on when we're doing the highlights. And with those metallics now base coated, we've reached the stage where we can apply the wash to the miniature, because everything can be washed and shaded at the same time with one colour, and in this case what we need is a dark brown for a nice sort of earthy feel to things. And so what I'm going to use is some Battle Mud wash, and to apply it I'm going for a medium shade brush from Citadel, so a good large brush because we want to put on a generous amount of this. When you're doing an all over wash like this, there is a balancing point you need to find as you apply it, because it's easy to put on too much, but likewise it's quite easy to put on too little. So what I recommend you do is get a good amount in your brush, pick a starting point, for example around here, and then apply it and just start working it into all the nooks and crannies and pushing it as far as it will go. Now what we want to do is to get it so that it does shade the recesses, but not so much that it starts pooling everywhere and starts forming blobs and things. So the kind of level of application that we're looking for once it's been spread out is sort of like what we're getting on the front of the model just there. That's the target of what we want. Now as it does start to dry, just keep an eye on it to see if it starts flowing anywhere, because it can start to run towards bottom of details and start clogging things up. In particular things that are sticking out, such as the bayonet we've got hanging on the back here. You see if I put a lot on here, it can really start to collect towards the bottom in a big drop. So just keep an eye out for that and just redistribute it before it dries. Now this quantity of wash will take a bit of time to dry, so once I've got this painted all over, I'm going to leave it for around about an hour before we move on to the next stage. And here we are with that wash completely dry, so now what we're going to do is take a pause painting the uniform and instead painting the skin. And to do this I'm going to start out with a base coat of Barbarian Bronze to get things going. So a nice warm colour this one, and I'm going to apply it using a smaller brush. I've got my size 0 for this because I need to carefully paint this around the moustache that we've got in there. So I need to make sure the paint's thinned and ready for that purpose on the palette, so there's lots of control over it. So there we go. Well, it's just a matter of very carefully applying this around the face. So we need to just carefully move in and make sure we just pick out all the flesh underneath the bare skin, and as I mentioned, just being careful of the moustache as we do so. The base coat's done, so now we can move on to adding a wash onto the skin to give it some depth and some warmth. And here what we want is a nice sort of chestnut colour, so it's going to bring that life to it. So in this case I'm going to use some flesh wash, which is just the kind of colour I'm after. And to apply it I'm sticking again to that size 0 brush, because we just want to keep this wash now localised just on the skin, so we don't want it to go out of control. So as you're getting ready on the palette, just take your time to make sure you've not overloaded your brush so that it doesn't run out of control over the other things. And when you're ready, it's just a matter of moving in and painting it directly over the flesh. Once that wash is dry, the next thing to do for flesh like this is to start to emphasise the raised areas with some layering and then some highlighting. And so for this, what we now need is a lighter skin tone. So I'm going to use some dwarven skin for this, and then one lighter than that. So here I'm going to use some elven flesh. But first of all, what we need is that dwarven skin. And for this, I've gone down to a size 00 brush now because there's not really much face visible, and what is visible is quite small. So we need the small brush for the control as we do this. On the palette, just make sure that paint's thinned and a little bit translucent as well, so some of the colour beneath will show through, because this means we can build up a smooth layer here, get some nice gradient between the shadow and lighter areas. So with that prepared then, we now need to start looking for the more raised up details on the face, and a great place to start is going to be on the nose. So what we want to do is carefully move in and just pick that out down the centre there, and then widen it out at the bottom. And then we need to follow the bone structure around here, so that means going on the cheeks, so we just want to get around there and going beneath the eye, following it down the side of the face, so we're looking at this area just here, all the while looking for recesses and just carefully avoiding them. With that done, we can now move on to some elven flesh, and with this what we're looking to do is be a little bit more selective about what parts we pick out, and it's really just the sharper features now. So for example, the centre of the nose, just very carefully down there to get that nice highlight on that. We also want to make sure we just get the cheekbone, so it's going to be just around here, a little bit on the brow as well, so carefully moving in just to get that bit there to help that pop out, and also just following along the jawline too. And there we are, the skin's been highlighted so you can see the detail of the face jumping out. But there's a little bit more to do on this face here, because first of all we've got a scar on there which we want to just alter the colour of slightly, and then we've got his other eye which is still working, and here for normal rank and file you wouldn't necessarily need to paint the eyes, but as this guy's a veteran we want to, so we're going to. So what we're going to do is start out with that scar, and here what we need to do is introduce a pink into the flesh we've been using. So I'm going to be mixing some glistening gums along with some elven flesh. Then for the eyes what we'll need is a pitch black followed by a pure white, so we're going to use some Doom Death Black followed by a little bit of White Star. But first of all we need to make our mix, so it's glistening gums and some elven flesh that I've got here. You can see I've got them next to each other on the palette. What I'm going to do is just bring a little bit of that pink into the flesh just to change the tone ever so slightly to make it a little bit pinker. So we're looking for something kind of like that. And we just need a small amount on the brush to start picking out the scar. So we're looking on this side of his head, just over here. Just going to very gently just pick out that raised detail. And there we are, the scar's done, so now we're going to paint in his good eye, starting out with some Doom Death Black. And for this first step, all we need to do is to paint a thin line of this colour in the very deepest recess of the eye. So just being as steady as possible and gently introducing it into this area here. And once that's done, we then need some White Star, and with this all we're going to do is just put a teeny little dot on either side of the black line, so be the whites of his eyes. And with that done, the Grenadier's face is now complete, and so we can move on to the next phase of painting the miniature, which is to return to that uniform. And now what we're going to do is layer some select colours to make them brighter and cleaner before we move on to highlighting. So we'll start out with a great coat once again, and so what we need to do is return to our original colour, which in this case is Kantor blue. And to apply it this time, I'm going for a size 0 brush to have a bit more control, because now rather than just painting it everywhere, instead we need to avoid the recesses and just aim at the flatter parts, the more raised up parts, that sort of thing. So on your palette, just make sure your paint is nicely thin for that purpose, and just check to make sure your brush isn't overloaded, because you don't need tons of paint here. And then we're ready to start applying it. And if we take a look around here on the coat, it's a great example of the sort of thing that we're doing here, because you can see these recesses from the creases and the folds in the fabric. We're aiming to avoid those darker areas and instead just concentrate on raised up parts such as just here, and carefully follow it on that raised up bit and not go quite into the corner. Same with this crease here where it dips in, we just want to avoid that and carry on again on the other side like that. So this way you can see we're making the blue a bit stronger and a bit cleaner, but we're also retaining the definition from that wash. Once that's done, you can see the coat is looking much cleaner and neater, and so now we can move on to doing this on a few other areas, and we'll start out with those trousers. So for this we're going to return to Griffin Claw, then we'll do the same on the red, so for this we're back to Sanguine Scarlet. Finally, we'll also need to do this on the silver, particularly the shoulder plates, because we need them to look nice and clean before we move on. So for this we're going to return to Surcoat Silver. But first of all, what we need is that Griffin Claw, and to apply it I'm sticking to my size 0 brush here, because essentially we're doing the exact same thing as what we just did with the blue, but now just on his trousers. So we don't need loads of it, but definitely make sure it's thinned down, so right down to that point there, and then just check to make sure the brush isn't overloaded so it doesn't go out of control. And then on the trousers, what we need to do is look for those flatter areas such as around the knee just here, and concentrate on those parts but not quite go into the corners where it meets the trousers, so we have that dark line separating the two. Wherever there's any creases such as the bottom of them just here, just make sure we avoid going into the darker areas. Now that's done on the trousers, we can do the same thing on the red details, so it's back to Sanguine Scarlet, and once again we're looking to paint the flatter areas, which in the case this circle on top of the bearskin is actually going to be most of it. We just want to make sure we concentrate it around this sort of area just here, so it's nice and bright. But also we've got the feather too, and when it comes to the feather, just make sure there's not much paint on your brush. Using the side of it, we can just skim along, and this way it just picks out that raised texture. And then finally we can return to Surcoat Silver, and this is going to be a layer for the silver parts, in particular the shoulder plates just here, so remember we're looking for the flat part and being careful not to fall into the recesses and corners, but also I want to make sure that I do the, well, almost barrel really of his space musket just here, where we want to get these parts to make sure it looks nice and clean and shiny. And there we are, the layering is done, so now we've got some really nice shines on the metallic parts there too. And so what we can now do is move on to the next stage, which is actually going to be a little bit of a hybrid because there's a tiny bit of layering to do now, but at the same time we can use the same colour to highlight some parts. And here what we need is an off-white, so I'm going to be using some ivory tusk for this. When I say the layering, it's great for doing the white belts and things, so it gets a near white appearance, makes it nice and clean, but also it's ideal for highlighting the trousers, so that's why we're going for this. Now to apply it, I've gone down to my size 00 brush, and what we want to do is just make sure, as ever, it's nice and smooth on the palette. But then with this, what I'm going to do is start out by looking for these belts. So the ones we did with that light grey earlier on, such as this one just here, all we want to do is very carefully move in and layer them completely to get that near white finish to them. So all the way around here with just 2 thin coats to ensure it's nice and smooth before leaving that detail there. Now in addition, as I mentioned, we can use this to highlight the trousers, and here what we want to do is accentuate all the creases. So we're looking for the ones such as this one going up just here, and what we want to do is just apply a line following along it where the light is catching. So that means gently applying it in areas like there. On this one, again, we just want to get that raised part of the peak of the fabric, same just there, and we can also just get the knee across here as well. And with that stage done, with those white belts appearing, you can see now we're really starting to get the impression of that sort of sci-fi Napoleonic soldier. And now what we need to do is move into highlighting everything else. And so we'll start out with that blue greatcoat. Here I'm going to use some Outdoor Guard blue, and with that done, we'll move on to the red. For this, I'm going to use some Demon red. Then finally, we've got the brown on the backpack. And here I'm going to use some Scrag brown. But first of all, I'm going to use some Outdoor Guard blue, applied again using the 00 brush. And with this, we're again looking to pick out the creases and raised edges of the fabric on that blue coat. So this is going to be all over it. So quite a large amount to do, but still it's just a matter of making sure that paint's thinned and under control on your brush, and then you just got to start looking for these features. So first of all, we want to look for any edges, like where it's been pinned back just here, and we just want to very gently just start following along that edge. So looking at going around areas such as there, then on the underside too. Now whenever we get to those deeper creases, we just make sure it doesn't drop into those, so it's just going to be a little bit on there, and on this side, skipping past that little darker bit just there. But as we go along, also look for any creases that run up the fabric, such as this bit just behind the leg. We want to make sure we just pick this out as well. And with that, the greatcoat is now highlighted, so we can move on to highlighting the red details. And here I've got some Demon red. What I'm looking to do first of all on the little patch we've got on top of the bearskin is to go around the outside of it. So just using the tip of the brush, just very carefully trace that outer rim there like that, and same on the bottom too. And then also we've got the feather, and here again, like when we did the layering on it, just going to lightly skim it using the side of the brush. So up the center, and then we just want to do a little bit on either side as well. Now that's done, we can move on to some Scrag brown, and this is going to be to highlight the brown parts on the backpack and also that little box on the chest. And here again I'm using the size 00 brush, and I'm looking for the sharper edges for this one. So you can see I'm just using the side of the brush just to gently skim along those edges so that we get a sharp highlight going around this feature. Now that backpack is highlighted and the little box that's on the chest as well. We're actually well on the way to finishing painting the model with just a few things to do. And we're going to actually work through a few more regular acrylics before we move on to finishing off the metallics. And so for those regular paints, what we now need is a dark grey to highlight all the black details. And for this, I'm going to use some Dungeon Stone Grey. Then we'll need a lighter grey, and this is going to be for that bedroll on the backpack. And for this, I'm going to use Carcharodon Grey. Finally, what we need to do is highlight the wood that appears on the musket. And for this, I'm going to use some boar hide. But first of all, what I'm going to use is some of that Dungeon Stone Grey. Again, again using the small brush, so still that size 00, and with this it's just a matter of highlighting all the black features. And so for a lot of these, what we've got is some edges that we can pick out. So on his shoes, for example, we've got things such as just the front of them around here, so we can highlight there, and the bit of the sole that's sticking up too, so areas like that. But in this phase, we've also got the bare skin. Now when it comes to doing this, just want to make sure there's not much paint on the brush, and just remove excess off on my thumb just there like that. And then using the side of the brush, I'm just going to lightly skim across it so it picks out some of that raised texture, and so it gives it a nice little highlight. With that done, we can now move on to Carcharodon Grey, and this is going to be the highlight for the bedroll that we've got round here. Again, we're looking for sharp corners and edges, such as this one just running along here. I just want to gently pick that out. Same across the top around here, and as it gets down to the sides, we want to get around here too. Now in addition, we can use this as a fine highlight on the bare skin. If we want to do this, just make sure there's not much paint in the brush. And this is just going to be along the top just to emphasize the shape of it. So just a few little flicks just to get a bit of a light color going across here. And then finally we can move on to boar hide, and first of all this is going to be to highlight the wooden parts of this laser musket. So we're looking for an edge highlight on the sharp corners, such as around here and around this circular bit, but also this is a great colour for highlighting his moustache as well. And with that, the wood on the musket is highlighted, but of course there is the metallics on there to do, including on the armour pieces that we've got on the miniature. So we're going to do those now, and for this we need to start out with a bright silver, so I'm going to use a mithril blade here. Then we need a bright gold, and for this I'm going to use some glistening gold. But first of all, it's mithril blade, and I'm sticking to the size 00 brush because this is going to be some more edge highlighting on all these silver details, which are scattered of course all around the miniature. And so what we want to do is look for all the corners and pick them out. So in the case of the armour, that's going to be looking at areas such as this edge that we've got running around here. We just want to follow along it, and same on this one here too. We've got some rivets along here that we want to pick out as well, such as just there. And of course there's plenty of silver on the musket just here, so again we just want to edge highlight all these details so they pop out nicely. And then finally it's time to add some glistening gold to highlight all the brass details. So for example, the little plate of this skull and wings that we've got on top of the head just here, just in the front of the bear skin, but also now's the time to start picking out all the brass buttons too, such as this one right here. And with this done, I'm then going to base the miniature, and in this case I'm going to go for a grasslands base because I think it's going to suit this miniature really nicely. And there we go, we've now completed our very own Astra Militarum Regiment. And as you've seen, doing something like this is really fun. So if you've never done it before, we definitely encourage you to give it a go. And remember, you can use any sort of regiment throughout history or any sort of movie or anything like that to inspire you here. Because if you take a look at the existing Guard regiments, they're all inspired by something and it is recognisable, which is one of the most fun parts of their character. But anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video and we'll see you again very soon.